Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. On September the 28th, 1970, died of a sudden heart attack the 52-year-old Egyptian president and dictator, Mr. Gamal Abdel Nasser. President Nasser had dreamed of becoming the greatest Arab leader of his time, and indeed, briefly, Egypt and Syria during his presidency had formed the United Arab Republic, from which Syria had then broken away. Controversially, in the 1950s, he closed the internationally important Suez Canal linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea to international shipping, which prompted the brief Suez Canal War in late October and early November 1956, where Britain, France, and Israel invaded the canal zone. He was then forced to reopen it to international shipping. In 1967, he blocked and declared in late May 1967 that the Egyptian objective would be to destroy Israel. Israel then launched on June the 5th, 1967, a preemptive attack because it was surrounded by three hostile Arab countries: Egypt in the west and southwest, Jordan in the east, and Syria in the northeast. As we know, Israel was able to destroy hundreds of airplanes and inflict serious other casualties on these three countries, and was able to conquer the west bank of Jordan River, including East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and even eastern Egypt up to the eastern shore of the Suez Canal. Following this humiliating defeat, President Nasser offered on national television to resign. But following a public outcry, he cancelled his resignation and was in office for 3 more years. So let's look at his life and presidency more closely. So he was born on January the 15th, 1918, and as I said, died on September the 20th, 1970. As the second president of Egypt from June 1956 until his death in September 1970. He demanded the unity of all Arabs under his leadership, and from 1958 to 1961, indeed, Egypt and Syria formed the United Arab Republic. In 1962, President Nasser began a series of major socialist measures and modernization reforms in Egypt. By 1963, Nasser's supporters gained power in several Arab countries, but he became embroiled in the North Yemen civil war and eventually the much larger Arab Cold War. In March 1965, he was elected to a second term after his political opponents were banned from running. By 1968, he appointed himself prime minister, or actually already in June 1967, launched the war of attrition to regain lost territory, began a process of depoliticizing the military, and issued a set of political liberalization reforms. After the conclusion of the 1970 Arab League summit, Nasser suffered a heart attack and died. 5 million mourners attended his funeral in Cairo. He was succeeded by another authoritarian Egyptian president, Anwar el-Sadat, who never became as popular as Nasser. Nasser remains even today, half a century after his death, an iconic figure in the Arab world, especially for his strides towards social justice and Arab unity, modernization policies, and anti-imperialist efforts. His presidency also encouraged and coincided with an Egyptian cultural boom and launched large industrial projects, including the Aswan Dam and Helwan City. Nasser's critics denounce him for authoritarianism, human rights violations, and his dominance of the army over civil institutions, establishing a pattern of military and dictatorial rule in Egypt, which unfortunately still continues. Socialist Union. His spouse was Taya Kazem. He had 5 children. His father was a postal worker. He attended an elementary school for the children of railway employees until 1924. Then he was sent to live with his paternal uncle in Cairo and to attend the Nahasin Elementary School. In 1990s, his maternal grandfather and changed schools, and this happened again in 1929. He moved to Helwan. Later, however, he returned to Alexandria. In Alexandria, Nasser became involved in political activism. After witnessing clashes between protesters and police in Manshia Square, he joined the demonstration without being aware why it was held. The ultra-nationalist Young Egypt Society demanded an end to colonialism in Egypt in the wake of the 1923 Egyptian constitution's annulment by Prime Minister Ismail Sidki. Nasser was arrested and detained for a night. Then his father bailed him out. When his father was transferred to Cairo in 1933, Nasser joined him and attended the Al-Nada Al-Masriya school. His involvement in political activity increased throughout school years, so that he only attended 45 days of lessons during his last year of high school. He strongly opposed the British-Egyptian Treaty of 1936 because it gave Britain the right to maintain military bases in Egypt. He was greatly influenced by Egyptian nationalism as espoused by politician Mustafa Kemal, poet Ahmed Shawki, and his anti-colonialist instructor at the Royal Military Academy, Aziz al-Masri, to whom Nasser expressed his gratitude in an interview given to a newspaper in 1961. In 1937, Nasser applied to the Royal Military Academy for army officer training. However, his police record of anti-government protest at first blocked his entry. He then enrolled in the law school at King Fouad University, but quit after 1 semester to reapply to the military academy. He managed to secure a meeting with Undersecretary of War Ibrahim Khairi Pasha, the person responsible for the academy's selection board, and requested his help. Khairi Pasha sponsored Nasser's second application, which was accepted in late 1937. Nasser, from then on, focused on his military career and had little contact with his family. In 1941, he was posted to Khartoum, Sudan, which was part of Egypt at the time. He returned to Egypt in September 1942. His first battlefield experience was in Palestine during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. He volunteered to serve with the Arab Higher Committee led by Muhammad Amin al-Husseini. His return to Egypt coincided with Hosni al-Zaim's Syrian coup d'etat. Soon after his return, he was summoned and interrogated by Prime Minister Ibrahim Abdel Hadi regarding suspicions that he was forming a secret group of dissenting officers. According to second-hand reports, Nasser convincingly denied the allegations. In October 1951, the Wafd government abrogated the Egyptian Treaty, which had given the British control over the Suez Canal until 1956. On January the 25th, 1952, a confrontation between British forces and police at Ismailia caused 40 Egyptian policemen to die, provoking riots in Cairo which killed 76 people. Afterwards, Nasser published a simple 6-point program in Rose al-Yusuf to dismantle feudalism and British influence in Egypt. In May, Nasser received word that Farouk knew the names of the free officers and intended to arrest them. He immediately entrusted Free Officer Zakaria Mohyeddin with the task of planning the government takeover by army units loyal to the association. On July the 22nd, 1952, the Free Officers launched the revolution, and already by July the 23rd, they were able to seize control of all government buildings, radio stations, and police stations, as well as army headquarters in Cairo. In June 1953, the monarchy was abolished and the Republic of Egypt was declared, with Naguib as its first president, General Naguib. In January 1953, Nasser overcame opposition from Naguib and created a one-party system under the Liberation Rally. In February 1954, Naguib announced his resignation. The RCC, Revolutionary Command Council, then proclaimed Nasser as both its chairman and prime minister. Nasser had put Naguib under house arrest. At the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in late April 1955, he was treated as the leading representative of the Arab countries and was one of the most popular figures at the summit. He officially adopted the positive neutralism of Yugoslav President Marshal Josip Broz Tito and Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru as a principal theme of Egyptian foreign policy regarding the Cold War. In January 1956, Egypt received a new constitution confirming the establishment of a single-party system under the National Union. The president received wide powers. Shortly leading to the Suez Crisis and brief war. By 1957, Pan-Arabism had become the Arab world's dominant ideology, and the average Arab citizen considered Nasser his undisputed leader. In March 1958, Nasser addressed the masses in Damascus, Syria, and waved before them the Saudi check given to Syrian security chief, and without the Saudis being aware of it, ardent Nasser supporter Abdel Hamid Sarraj was to shoot down Nasser's airplane. A day after announcing the attempt on his life, Nasser established a new provisional constitution proclaiming a 600-member National Assembly. 400 were to come from Egypt and 200 from Syria, and the dissolution of all political parties. However, in September 1961, secessionist army units launched a coup in Damascus, declaring Syria's secession from the United Arab Republic. In February 1963, a military coup in Iraq led by a Ba'athist Nasserist alliance toppled Qasim, who was subsequently shot dead. Abdel Salam Aref, a Nasserist, was chosen to be the new president. In 1961, Nasser tried to firmly establish Egypt as the Arab world's leader and to promote a second revolution in Egypt with the purpose of merging Islamic and socialist thinking. To achieve this, he started several reforms to modernize Al-Azhar, which serves as the de facto leading authority in Sunni Islam, and to ensure its prominence over the Muslim Brotherhood and the more conservative Wahhabism promoted by Saudi Arabia. Following Syria's secession, Nasser grew concerned with Amr's inability to train and modernize the army, and with the state within a state, Amr had created in the military command and intelligence apparatus. In late 1961, Nasser established the Presidential Council and decreed it the authority to approve all senior military appointments. Starting in January 1968, Nasser ordered attacks against Israeli positions east of the then blockaded Suez Canal. In March, Nasser offered Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement arms and funds after their performance against Israeli forces in the Battle of Karameh that month. However, he also advised Arafat to think of a Palestinian state, so he favored a so-called two-state solution comprising the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So as the Emergency Arab League Summit closed on September the 28th, 1970, it had been prompted by at least tensions in Jordan between an increasingly autonomous or self-governing Palestine Liberation Organization and King Hussein's government, following the Dawson's Field hijackings, and then a military campaign had been launched to root out PLO forces. And the offensive elevated risks of a regional war in the Middle East. So just hours after escorting the last Arab leader to leave on September the 28th, 1970, Nasser suffered a heart attack. He was immediately transported to his house, where his physicians tended to him. Despite their help, he died several hours later, around 6 p.m. at age 52. According to his doctor Al-Sawi Habibi, Nasser likely died of arterial sclerosis or hardening of arteries, varicose veins, and complications from his long-standing diabetes. He also was a heavy smoker with a family history of heart disease. Two of his brothers had died in their 50s from the same condition. He had also suffered heart attacks in 1966 and September 1969, but true to the authoritarian system he had instituted, the public didn't know of them.